Hey everyone, this is Ryan Eckert with Peak Endurance Solutions, and you're listening to the VO2 Max podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the VO2 Max podcast. This is episode 23, and in this particular episode, I'm going to be focusing on supplements to improve endurance performance and what evidence is out there to support which supplements as actually having some type of benefit on endurance performance. Again, I'm not a registered dietitian. I'm here strictly to speak about what the evidence says about particular supplements. I'm not here to recommend specific supplements to particular types of athletes or to individual athletes. It's kind of up to you as a listener to determine which of these supplements you might want to try based on the evidence that I present. But the main point of this podcast is just to talk about the evidence surrounding a select few supplements that have some evidence to support their use in enhancing endurance performance. So that's the major focus of this podcast, and I wanted to talk about this particular topic, dietary supplementation, just as kind of a follow-up to the last podcast that I put out, which was talking all about evidence-based fueling strategies during training and racing. The last podcast episode was focused on how to properly fuel yourself in terms of fluids, carbohydrates, and electrolytes to maximize or to optimize performance during a training session or during a race. And so I thought it would be a good follow-up to now talk about dietary supplements that have some evidence to support enhancing endurance performance. Before we can start to talk about supplements though, and what some of the evidence is behind certain supplements, we need to have a little bit of a conversation surrounding other things to be aware of before considering supplementation. So if you were to go and work with any kind of, or at least any kind of good registered dietitian who knew what they were doing, there would be a couple things that they would have you work on before you would even consider supplementing with any kind of substance to enhance your performance. And again, I'm going to be talking about legal supplements to enhance performance. There are obviously illegal substances that can enhance endurance performance. I would never touch on that. I'm only talking about in this podcast legal substances that are going to enhance performance. But again, before we talk about those supplements, let's talk about a few things that you need to make sure that you have dialed in as an athlete before you even consider moving to supplements. Because again, supplements are there to, as the name implies, supplement an already well-balanced and adequate diet. So that is the first goal of every single athlete, no matter if you're an endurance athlete, a strength athlete, or even just your average human being looking to maximize health and wellness so that you can be the best version of yourself for your work, for your family, for your friends, whatever it is. The first place to start is with your diet, the foods that you are consuming. And that should be the number one goal before considering any type of dietary supplementation, is to do your best to optimize your diet, given your dietary restrictions, your beliefs, and your dietary practices and certain restrictions that you might have. Optimize your diet first so that you can maximize the adequacy of the amount of macronutrients that you're taking in. So these would be carbohydrates, fats, and protein, as well as micronutrients that you're taking in, which would include things like vitamins, minerals, and other trace minerals. So you want to make sure that you have optimal intake of not only the big nutrients, carbohydrates, fats, and protein. Oftentimes there's a lot of a little bit too much emphasis on those macronutrients and making sure that you're getting in enough of those, or some diets or dietary approaches will have you manipulate how much carbohydrate versus how much fat versus how much protein you're taking in. And so sometimes in the realm of nutrition and just dietary approaches in general, there's a big emphasis on the carbohydrates, fats, and protein. And sometimes the micronutrients like vitamins and minerals get left out of the conversation. And micronutrients can have a huge impact on how you feel and how you function, and also how you perform as an athlete, especially because as an athlete, not only do you have a greater demand for carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, but you also have a greater demand of micronutrients compared to the average human being who is not an endurance athlete. And so making sure that you have a good, well-rounded, balanced diet that includes adequate intake of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, but also just healthful foods and minimizing the amount of processed foods that you're consuming so that you can maximize the amount of vitamins and minerals that you're taking in as well. That is step number one. Okay, and I'm not going to go into what the optimal diet should look like because, first of all, there is no optimal diet. It's going to be a little bit different for everyone, obviously, depending on your restrictions, your unique approaches that you take to your diet, what you like, what you don't like. So there is no such thing as one specific type of dietary approach that's optimal. It's whatever dietary approach gets you the macronutrients and the micronutrients that you need to feel your best and to perform your best. But that is step number one. So don't even consider any of the supplements that I'm going to be talking about in this podcast if your diet is kind of crappy and consists of a lot of processed foods and a ton of added sugars, and you're not eating enough fruits and vegetables or whole grains or things of that nature. So just do the basics first. Make sure that you're eating an adequate diet, getting in enough macronutrients and micronutrients. You're eating a generally healthy diet, and that is the first place to start for every single athlete. Now, I will say, some athletes, even if they are doing their best to eat a well-rounded and adequate and healthful diet, still need to supplement with certain things. So this might be like taking a daily multivitamin, or let's just say that as an athlete, you don't get enough iron from the food sources that you're consuming. You might need to consume iron, or you might need to take an electrolyte supplement, something like magnesium or sodium or potassium if you're not eating enough foods to replace some of the micronutrients that you're losing in your sweat, or that you're just cycling through at a higher rate because you're an athlete. So it's not to say that you might not also need a supplement to make sure that you're getting in enough of the micronutrients, specifically the vitamins and minerals that you need as an athlete. So even if you are having or consuming a well-balanced and healthful diet, keep in mind that sometimes supplementation here is necessary to make sure that you're getting in enough of those smaller nutrients, those micronutrients. But that's the first step, adequate diet, and then supplement if you feel like you're missing out on certain things, or if, say, you're working with a physician or a dietitian and they feel like you're missing out on certain micronutrients, then make sure that you're supplementing with the things that you need. And that is always step one. And then step two, which is just as important as step one, is making sure that you're adequately hydrating yourself throughout the day around training and racing, because you need to make sure that you're adequately hydrating yourself, because that has such a large impact on how you feel in general and then how you're going to perform in your training. Because obviously if you're not fueling yourself correctly from both a macronutrient, micronutrient standpoint, as well as from a hydration standpoint, you're not going to perform your best anyways. So it doesn't even really matter what you supplement with to enhance your performance, because it's just going to be blunted or muted, because you're going to be performing suboptimally because your diet is potentially suboptimal, or your hydration is potentially suboptimal, or you're slightly deficient in certain micronutrients, and that's then having an impact on your functioning and your performance. So that's why the primary goal is proper diet and proper hydration before you even consider supplementing to enhance your performance. And then one other thing that you're going to want to make sure that you've at least paid attention to and you're working on trying to optimize is fueling during training and racing. And so I covered this in the last podcast episode that I did, and I'll be sure to link to that down below in the show notes. But the reason you want to make sure that you're trying to optimize your fueling during training and racing is because that also has such a significant impact, again, on how you feel and perform during a training session or during a race. So it's not even worth trying to supplement your way out of that issue, because you're not even going to notice a difference from some of these supplements that might otherwise have a difference or show up in your training or racing, just because your fueling during a training session or a race is inadequate. So again, the three major things that you want to focus on before you even consider any of the information that I'm about to talk about is proper diet, getting in the right amount of macronutrients and micronutrients for you, adequate hydration throughout the day, and then proper fueling during training sessions and during racing. And again, proper fueling includes fluids, electrolytes, and carbohydrates. So making sure that you're taking in the optimal amount of those three types of nutrients for you so that you can optimize how you're feeling during training and then during racing as well. So then once you have those three covered, or you're doing your best across those three areas, that should hopefully start to optimize how you're feeling and functioning and performing throughout the day, and then during training and during racing as well. And then that's where potentially trying some evidence-based supplementation to enhance your performance might give you that extra little percentage point. So when I talk about supplements that enhance performance, these aren't necessarily things that have a drastic effect on your performance. These are things that are going to have slight, potentially imperceptible effects on your performance. Some of them you might notice, some of them you might not, but they might be like a kind of a 1% performance enhancer. So that's why you just need to make sure that you have the big things, the 99% of your performance and your functioning handled, which is diet, hydration, and fueling during training and racing sessions, before you even consider supplementation, because these are all things that are really just that extra little percentage point improvements in your performance. All right, so that's why I had such a big emphasis on diet, hydration, and then intra-racing and training fueling before I even started to talk about evidence to support certain supplements to enhance performance. Because sometimes, and especially nowadays with marketing that's all over the place in social media and in television, or in magazines and things like that, there's usually a big evidence on products and supplements to enhance performance or to enhance your recovery, so on and so forth. And while some of those things might help, some of them don't. Some of it is just marketing and they're trying to convince you that something works when it really doesn't. Even if some of those things do work and there is evidence to support them, again, it's all just little 1 to 2% marginal improvements in your performance that are really only going to matter or be able to help improve your performance if you're functioning optimally through a good diet, you're making sure that you're adequately hydrated, and you're fueling properly during training and racing. It's kind of the boring things that have the biggest impact on your performance. Kind of like when it comes to recovery, the best thing you can do for recovery is just getting enough sleep and making sure that you're not going too hard and training too often, right? So you are getting enough sleep and you're approaching your intensity distribution and training the right way. Those are probably the two biggest things in terms of recovering between training sessions and recovering over time, as opposed to like everyone wants to focus on recovery boots and massage guns and all sorts of different modalities to enhance the recovery, when really it's just the boring things that tend to have the biggest impact. And in this case, it's also, when it comes to just diet and supplementation in general, it's sometimes just the simple, boring things that have the largest impact, right? So keep that in mind as I start to talk about supplements here, that these are just marginally going to enhance your performance, potentially, based on the evidence that's out there. So when it comes to dietary supplements, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of supplements out there that are going to claim to enhance your performance. There's really only a few that actually have sufficient evidence to document potential benefits for improving endurance performance. So I'm going to focus on supplements that have evidence to improve endurance performance. There are some other supplements for like strength and power-based athletes that have some evidence to show that they can improve their performance as well. I'm just going to be focusing on supplements that have some evidence to show enhanced performance specifically in endurance athletes. All right, and there's really 4 that I'm going to talk about. All right, so again, there are other supplements out there that might claim to enhance your performance, but just be aware that they, in all likelihood, don't have sufficient evidence to show that they actually improve your performance. These are really the primary 4 supplements that have enough evidence that we've built up over the years to show that there is probably some type of benefit in enhancing endurance performance. So the first one I'm going to start with is one that we've all heard of. It's one of the most popular types of substances consumed in America, caffeine, right? It's in coffee, it's in energy drinks. You can buy caffeine powders, caffeine pills. Caffeine is everywhere. And a lot of, especially adults, rely on caffeine, whether it's drinking coffee throughout the day or drinking energy drinks throughout the day. A lot of athletes will rely on it too in the form of coffee and energy drinks, and it's in bars and gels and things like that as well. Caffeine is probably one of the most well-studied, and there's actually quite a bit of evidence to suggest that it can improve endurance performance. And it does it primarily through an increased central nervous system stimulation and a subsequent reduction in the rating of perceived exertion of a given exercise intensity. So essentially what that means is caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant, and what it essentially does downstream is makes it so that a given exercise intensity or effort level feels less effortful, right? So let's say you're going out for a 90-minute, or let's say you're doing a 10K, and you do the 10K without caffeine, and then you do that 10K running race with caffeine. In all likelihood, taking caffeine, you'll be able to work at a higher intensity because it's going to reduce the rating of perceived exertion that you're experiencing during that race. And now rating of perceived exertion is a big limiting factor in terms of endurance performance, because at a certain point, if something is perceived as too painful, mentally, even the most mentally tough athletes in the world are only so mentally strong before they have to slow down because something is too painful, right? And so if caffeine can kind of blunt that pain response, and allow you to work at the same intensity or a higher intensity with a lower rating of perceived exertion, you're going to be able to go longer at the same intensity or go for the same amount of time at a higher intensity, just because you're not experiencing quite as much pain or as much exertion, right? And so caffeine has a lot of evidence to document those specific benefits. Now with each supplement, I'm going to talk about what the supplement is, the kind of the use or the mechanism behind it, and then I'm also going to give some dosage recommendations and frequency and timing recommendations based on the literature that's out there. I'm going to include a PDF that's going to have all this information in a table for each of the supplements. So if you are feeling the need to write this stuff down, you don't necessarily have to write it down, because you can just go to the show notes, download that PDF, and everything that I'm talking about is in there, so you can have access to all this information in just one simple table. All right, so now when it comes to caffeine, the recommended dosage is anywhere between 2 to 9 milliliters per kilogram of body weight. And so essentially what that means is, like, let's say you're 150 pounds, divide your body weight by 2.2 to get your weight in kilograms. So if you're like me, for example, I'm 165 pounds. If I divide my body weight by 2.2, I'm about 75 kilograms. So an effective dose of caffeine for me to realize those benefits is anywhere between 2 to 9 times my body weight in kilograms. So if I'm 75 kilograms, multiply that by 2, I need at least 150 milligrams, and sorry, it's milligrams per kilogram of body weight. I need at least 150 milligrams of caffeine before exercise to experience those benefits. Now, if you're a habitual coffee drinker or caffeine drinker, you need a higher dosage than what you're habitually used to experience those benefits. So anyone who's had caffeine before knows that you become habituated to it. So if you're used to having 1 cup of coffee in the morning for months and months, sometimes you might get, or at a certain point, you'll get used to 1 cup of coffee, and it might not give you that same stimulatory effect that 1 cup of coffee did when you first started drinking it. So you might need to take 2 cups of coffee. And that's part of the danger with caffeine, is that you can eventually just start upping it so much to a point that might potentially be unhealthy, because you don't want to just be having too much caffeine every day, all day. But if you're, say, habitually used to having a cup or 2 of coffee in the morning, that's in all likelihood 100 to 200 milligrams of caffeine right there. So you might need to have a little bit more than that to experience the benefits of caffeine. So that's why there's such a large range, 2 to 9 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. For those who don't necessarily drink caffeine on a regular basis, 2 to 3 milligrams is likely sufficient. But again, if you're used to drinking that amount, then you just might need to have a little bit more to get the benefits. Now, one caveat with caffeine is that it is a diuretic, so it will make you pee. And I've had some bad experience with this in longer distance races that I've done, where I've, say, taken 300 to 400 milligrams of caffeine before the race, and I obviously feel it. I feel the benefits of it, but it's a diuretic, so it makes me pee, and it makes me pee a lot. So if you've ever drank a lot of coffee, 30 to 60 minutes later, you're going to be peeing a lot because it's a diuretic. Now, that becomes a potential problem if you're participating in prolonged endurance exercise. So if you're doing like a 5K or a 10K or any kind of race that's like under 90 minutes long, it's not that big of a deal, because you're not necessarily going to need to pee so urgently that you're going to have to go during the race, and it's going to dehydrate you and then affect your performance. But if you're, say, a long distance triathlete who does half Ironman or Ironman distance racing, and you have a ton of caffeine before the race, I've had this experience before where you've had to pee a lot during the race and then you dehydrate yourself. And then it becomes a hindrance to your performance because now you've dehydrated yourself and you're potentially just peeing out all the fluids that you're taking in during the race and all the electrolytes that you're taking in during the race as well. So this also, again, ties back into don't even consider supplementation if you're not getting adequate fueling during training and racing, because it's not even going to matter at that point what you supplement with. And in the case of caffeine, if you kind of over supplement with it, or if you don't necessarily take it in a smart way, it can potentially hinder your performance if you take so much of it, like I've done in previous races, where it then dehydrates you throughout the race because you're just peeing so much throughout the race. So that being said, me personally, I won't take caffeine before a race unless it's like a 5K or a 10K or maybe like a half marathon, something where I'm out there less than 90 minutes and I don't necessarily have to go to the bathroom during the time frame of the race. If I'm doing anything longer than 90 minutes, say like an Olympic distance triathlon or like a marathon and longer, then I won't take caffeine during the race. I'll take a little bit of caffeine during longer races, just a little bit, but not a lot, so that it doesn't necessarily give me that diuretic effect, because the diuretic effect is something you do want to avoid during prolonged races. During training sessions, it might not be a huge deal if you're taking a little bit before training, because you can obviously stop and go to the bathroom and then just kind of keep replacing the fluids that you're losing. But even during training, you don't want to over supplement with it so that you're just peeing everything out. And then it's potentially hindering a key long training session. So just be careful with caffeine, and just be careful with when you take it and how you take it and before what races you're taking it, just to avoid the negative experiences that I've had in the past where I do take caffeine and then 60 to 90 minutes into the race, I'm just peeing so much that I'm then subsequently depleting myself of fluids and electrolytes, because then that creates an issue in and of itself. But for really short events, caffeine can be really, really great, especially for like 5Ks or 10Ks where you're already going like max effort for a very short period of time. Taking caffeine can be incredibly helpful in, again, reducing the perceived exertion of working at that intensity so that you can hold that 5K or 10K intensity for longer, or even hold a slightly higher intensity than you otherwise would be able to hold without caffeine. But again, people have different tolerances to caffeine too. Some people like it, some people don't. So caffeine is something that you definitely have to experiment with on an individual basis to make sure that it kind of sits well with you and that you can feel the effects of it. But there is a lot of evidence to document the benefits of caffeine for endurance performance. Moving on to the next supplement, beta-alanine. So this is something that is probably less common than caffeine. But beta-alanine is a non-essential amino acid. So you have a bunch of amino acids. Some of them are essential, some of them are non-essential. Beta-alanine is one of the non-essential amino acids that, when consumed, is a precursor to carnosine. Now, an increased concentration of carnosine in the muscle leads to a greater buffering capacity during exercise. So the reason that this is important is because during exercise you produce hydrogen ions, and the intramuscular environment can become very acidic if you're accumulating hydrogen ions too quickly, which happens when you increase exercise intensity and you start to go above your lactate threshold. You start to accumulate hydrogen ions really, really quickly, and you need to buffer those hydrogen ions to keep the intramuscular environment from becoming too acidic. So things that help increase your buffering capacity can potentially help with enhancing endurance performance, particularly endurance performance that is at your threshold or above your threshold. So if beta-alanine can increase carnosine concentration, which then increases buffering capacity during exercise, it can potentially be effective. And there is actually a pretty good amount of evidence to document this. So the dosage of beta, and you can buy beta-alanine just like in a supplement form in say a tablet. You can obviously get food sources of it, but probably the best way to get the dosage you're going to need is through some kind of supplement, whether it's like a powder or just like a pill. The recommended dosage is 1.6 to 6.4 grams of beta-alanine per day. And that is so that you can increase the carnosine concentration in your muscle over time. So it's not necessarily something you take before exercise and then you get a benefit from it. It's something that you need to take on a daily basis so that you can build up your stores of carnosine levels. And carnosine levels will start to fall within about a week or two of stopping your intake of beta-alanine. So if this is a supplement that you do want to try out in the long term, it is something that you do have to take for the long term. And you do usually have to take it for a few weeks at least to start to build up your carnosine stores in the muscle. And then you might, and again, this is something that you might not like all of a sudden notice a drastic difference, but it is again one of those things that is a potential 1 to 2% performance enhancer. But you do have to take it long term, and if you stop taking it for more than a week, your carnosine levels in the muscle can start to fall, and then you'll obviously lose the benefits of that increased buffering capacity. So the caveat with beta-alanine is potentially this might not be something to worry about supplementing for if you're doing, say, a prolonged endurance event where you're exercising well below your threshold and you're not producing a lot of lactate and therefore hydrogen ions. Although there isn't necessarily enough evidence out there to say that it for sure doesn't help with those types of endurance endeavors or races. But this is probably something that's going to have a greater impact on athletes who are doing races that are higher intensity, closer to their threshold or above their threshold. So something like a 10K for a lot of athletes is basically right at their lactate threshold. 5Ks are above or at threshold for a lot of athletes. So for those types of races, beta-alanine might be an effective supplement for you. All right, moving on to the third supplement. So this one is maybe slightly more common than something like beta-alanine, and this is nitrates or nitrites. And these can come from a few different sources, but from beets or beetroot is the most common source. And so I've, for example, seen a lot of athletes take like beetroot supplements and things like that because they are marketed just to enhance your performance, although most people don't necessarily know why. But beets, or not necessarily the beet itself, but it's what's in the beet, which is the nitrates and nitrites that helps enhance endurance performance. All right. And there is a good amount of evidence to show that there is some good benefit to consuming beetroot or to taking in nitrates and nitrites, and the benefits that can have on prolonged endurance performance. So essentially what happens is if you're supplementing with, say, a beetroot supplement, or you're even consuming beets, like if you could juice beets and just drink a beetroot juice, you could eat the beet itself. There's a lot of different ways of getting in beetroot. Probably one of the more common ways of doing it, and the more palatable way of doing it, is just through some kind of supplement, whether it's like a tablet or a powder. But essentially what happens is when you're consuming a beetroot supplement, you're taking in nitrates. In the body, nitrates are then converted into nitrites. And it's the increased nitrite concentration which has a potential benefit on endurance performance. And so research tends to show that essentially, like the way I like to think about it is it makes your body more aerobically efficient, right? So the research tends to show that when you consume this supplement for a long enough period of time, it reduces submaximal exercise oxygen cost. So it, in essence, makes you more efficient, right? So if you're exercising at the same intensity that you were 2 weeks ago, but your oxygen cost is a little bit lower, you've gotten more efficient. And so you'll therefore be able to hold that intensity or that pace for longer, right? And so it reduces the oxygen cost of submaximal exercise, and it potentially improves endurance performance via increased nitric oxide production. So in the body, nitrites is then converted even further into nitric oxide. And so nitric oxide enhances mitochondrial efficiency, so the efficiency of the quote-unquote powerhouse of the cell, where aerobic metabolism takes place in the mitochondria. So it enhances the efficiency of the mitochondrial conversion of fats into ATP via oxidative metabolism. And that's probably one of the reasons why you see a reduction in oxygen cost during submaximal exercise. But the nitric oxide also increases muscle oxygenation, so again, just gets more oxygen to the muscle. And so those benefits from the nitric oxide is probably what reduces the submaximal exercise oxygen cost. And so all that together essentially means that it just makes you more efficient at submaximal exercise intensities, right? So you need less oxygen to go at a given intensity or pace. Now that's huge, especially for prolonged distance endurance athletes. So like things in half marathon, or athletes who are doing half marathons or marathons, or like ultra marathons or marathon distance swims, long distance triathlons, anything that is at a sub-maximal pace, so like well below VO2 max or well below threshold, nitrites or nitrates coming from beetroot has a potential benefit for you, because it can make you essentially more efficient at those sub-maximal exercise intensities, which is huge. Now, the dosage of this, it's hard because a lot of the research is usually done in like millimoles of a beetroot substance. And so sometimes for a lot of people, it's hard to convert that into a measurement that they can understand. But essentially what the research suggests is about 5 to 9 millimoles per day of beetroot, or about a half a liter per day of beetroot juice. And the evidence surrounding the dose and whether or not there's like a dose-response relationship is a little bit less clear. But essentially, if you supplement with at least a half a liter per day of beetroot juice, then that should be an adequate amount to hopefully see some kind of benefit in your performance. Now, a lot of times people will opt for supplements, and sometimes supplements can be very vague in the amount of beetroot that they're including in that supplement. But essentially, you want to make sure that you're having the equivalent of about a half of a liter of beetroot juice or beetroot in that supplement that you're consuming to ensure that you're getting some kind of benefit from it. And you can go online too and obviously convert like millimoles to like grams, which is usually what most supplements will provide when they're giving you an indication of how much beetroot is in a supplement. They'll say it's the equivalent of like so many grams of beetroot or this many number of beets. So whatever supplement you're going for, you might just need to go online and do some conversions between 5 to 9 millimoles, convert that over to like how many beets that is or how many grams of beetroot that is, and make sure that you're getting enough in the supplement that you're consuming. Now, beets or nitrates, just like beta-alanine, need to be consumed on an ongoing basis for a prolonged period of time because you need to build up the nitrite stores in your body. So the evidence suggests anywhere between 1 to 15 days of supplementation, and the only reason the range is that big and it starts with 1 is because there is some evidence that there might be some immediate acute effects of nitrate supplementation, but the majority of research has tended to focus on longer term, or tends to show that longer term supplementation is needed to get your nitrite stores up so that you can then get the benefit of the nitrite conversion to nitric oxide production during exercise. And then that's where you're going to see the benefits. And the reason is you don't store necessarily nitrites in your body. And so the concentration of nitrite will start to decline in your body after about a half of a day of stopping the consumption of nitrates. So that's why you need to consume them and consume them on a regular and ongoing basis. So just like beta-alanine, if it's something that you feel like is going to give you a potential marginal performance enhancement, then it is something you'll need to consume on a regular basis, whether it's again through eating a beet itself, consuming beetroot juice, or taking an actual supplement. All right, and then the fourth and final supplement that I'm going to talk about that has some evidence to support its effectiveness is sodium bicarbonate. And this one is very similar to beta-alanine in the sense that the mechanism of action that sodium bicarbonate works through is its buffering capacity during exercise. So bicarbonate is a buffer in and of itself in the body. And so the theory behind it is if you're ingesting more bicarbonate via sodium bicarbonate, there's obviously different ways of getting bicarbonate into the body. Sodium bicarbonate is probably one of the most common and the ways that it's done in the research most often. But if you get more bicarbonate into the muscle, you're in theory going to have a greater buffering capacity of the hydrogen ions that build up during exercise, particularly intense exercise. And so sodium bicarbonate is very similar to beta-alanine in the sense that you need to consume it, although actually it's slightly different than beta-alanine in the sense that usually consuming sodium bicarbonate is something that you do on an acute basis. So like before exercise, not necessarily on a long-term basis. So you don't necessarily take sodium bicarbonate every single day to build up stores in your body. It's more so something that you consume on an immediate right before exercise basis to get the benefits and then you just consume it again before an intense exercise session when you feel like you're going to need it. Whereas beta-alanine works this in a similar manner, but you just need to consume it on a long-term basis so that you can build up carnosine stores in your muscle. Whereas sodium bicarbonate is something that you usually take in like a supplement about an hour or two before exercise. The recommended dosage is 0.2 to 0.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. So again, just do the math. Divide your body weight in pounds by 2.2. That'll give you your body weight in kilograms, and then multiply that by 0.2 to 0.4, and that'll give you the range of sodium bicarbonate that is needed based on the evidence to potentially enhance your performance. Now, typically sodium bicarbonate in the past was taken orally, so in like a powder or via some type of tablet usually. But nowadays there's sodium bicarbonate based lotions that are coming out, or creams that you can rub on your muscles, on the skin topically, that are in theory getting sodium bicarbonate into the bloodstream and then into the muscle. Now those products are so new, and there's very, very, very little research on the creams itself or the topical solutions. But there is a lot of evidence to support that the oral ingestion of sodium bicarbonate has a benefit. Now, the big caveat with ingesting sodium bicarbonate is that it can give some people pretty bad GI upset, which as an endurance athlete is sometimes game over, especially for prolonged endurance athletes that are participating in long distance events. So that's why there's been a shift to try and find a different way of getting it into the bloodstream and the muscle. And so by applying it to the skin, that's another way of getting it into your system. Now, like I said, though, the research is just so new when it comes to the sodium bicarbonate-based creams or lotions that it's really, really difficult to say whether or not those things actually work. There are a couple brands out there that make them. They are insanely expensive compared to like what you would pay to get a sodium bicarbonate supplement that you would take orally. And so I'm just very, very hesitant to say that the creams or topical application of sodium bicarbonate is worth it, because we don't necessarily know if it helps performance yet, because I think there's only been like one research study that's been done. And it's just a published abstract. It's not even like a fully published research paper. It's just an abstract. And so it's so new that I'd be very hesitant to say whether or not it's worth it to pay that amount of money to buy a cream when you don't really know if it's going to work, because there's not enough evidence. There's far more evidence over the decades to support the oral ingestion of sodium bicarbonate. And so when it comes to sodium bicarbonate, if it is something you are interested in, again, this is probably more relevant for athletes that are doing very intense races that are at your threshold or above. If you feel like it's something you want to try it in training at the right dosage, at the lowest possible end of the dosage range. See how you feel on it. And if you feel like you see a benefit, or you feel like it's helping you, then you can obviously play around with the dosage a little bit to see if you can tolerate a little bit more. And obviously if you get to a certain dosage and it does give you GI upset, then just go back down. But it is something that you're going to want to play around with before you try it in a race, just to make sure that you don't get any GI or stomach upset. And then obviously you can try the creams if you want, but just keep in mind that there is far less research to document the benefits of the creams than there is ingesting it orally. And so there is obviously going to be a difference between ingesting something orally and then getting something into your system via the skin. So just keep that in mind if you are making the decision to go with, say, a cream versus trying to take something orally, that the majority of the research that does support sodium bicarbonate supports it taken in a supplement orally, not necessarily from a cream or a lotion. All right. And with that, like I said, you want to take that about an hour to 2 hours before exercise. So that's where having this table that you can get in the show notes and the PDF is useful, because you'll get the names of the supplements, the mechanisms through which they work, and then the dosage ranges and the frequency or the timing of it, so that you can make sure that you're taking enough of it and you're taking it at the right timing or at the right frequency. If you do, again, decide to choose to take one of these supplements to see if it has a benefit on your endurance performance. All right, so that's it though. Those are the 4 supplements that have a good amount of evidence surrounding them to suggest that they might have a potential benefit on performance. Like I said, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of substances and supplements out there that claim to enhance performance. And again, just to reiterate, I'm not talking about illegal substances, because there are obviously illegal substances that we know have a benefit on performance, but are banned substances. So I would never condone the use of those. And so I would never even talk about the benefits of those in a podcast or just with athletes in general, because I would never condone the use of them. This is focusing on legal supplements and legal substances. And these are the four. These are the main four that have a benefit for endurance athletes, or at least sufficient evidence to suggest that there might be a benefit for endurance athletes. Outside of that, though, it's just a toss-up. And you're just probably wasting your money if you do decide to get another supplement that isn't one of these four, hoping that it improves your performance. Now, I will say supplements, and especially the rate of development of different types of substances and supplements that are out there is so rapid that it takes a while for research to catch up. So there is, in all likelihood, other substances out there that have a benefit for endurance performance, but there just isn't the research out there yet to support it. It doesn't mean that some of the other supplements that are out there don't work. It just means that there is either not enough evidence to support it, or there just hasn't been any research that's been done yet on it. So like, for example, the cream-based sodium bicarbonate lotions, those are just so new. It's not necessarily to say that they don't work. It's just that they're so new and there just hasn't been enough research yet to say, yes, it works, and it can work just as well as taking sodium bicarbonate orally. So just keep that in mind. Normally when I personally am trying to decide whether or not a supplement is worth my time and my money and my energy, I usually want it to have some level of evidence to back it up. Obviously, there are things out there that have no evidence yet and they might be effective, but this endurance sport is already expensive enough. And so rather than just throwing money away on supplements that potentially don't work or that could potentially be harmful, because there is no guarantee with certain supplements and potentially the manufacturers that are making those supplements that those supplements are safe in and of themselves. So that's a whole nother topic of conversation too, is you want to make sure that you're getting your supplements from reputable companies that are doing third-party tests on their products to make sure that they're safe, free of banned substances, what's in the bottle or in the supplement is actually in the supplement, in the dosages that it says it's giving you. I won't go too much more into that other than just saying that. But that's why I usually like to have a certain level of evidence supporting the supplement before I take it, and then making sure I'm getting that supplement from a reputable company, especially supplements that are claiming to enhance performance, because that's usually one of the most common categories of supplements that have tainted products. And what I mean by tainted is they might have potentially banned substances or potentially harmful substances in them. It's usually the category of supplements that are aimed at enhancing performance. And it's most common with bodybuilding related supplements. Those are the ones that tend to be tainted the most. Buying like a beta-alanine supplement is probably less likely to be tainted than some kind of potentially testosterone enhancing bodybuilding supplement. Something that might be a little bit more shady. But again, there is no guarantee unless it's third-party tested and it's coming from a reputable manufacturer. So just keep that in mind when you're deciding on which supplement to consume or to take as well. And again, I'm just going to circle back to it, what I talked about for the first third of the podcast. Make sure that diet throughout the day, hydration throughout the day, and then fueling during training and racing is your major priority first before you consider supplements. Because again, supplements are going to have no noticeable impact if your performance and your functioning is suffering because of an inadequate diet or inadequate hydration or inadequate fueling during training and racing. So if you had any questions on supplements, hopefully this podcast is useful for you as an endurance athlete. If you have any questions on anything that I covered in this podcast, as always, you can reach out to me via my email, which is peakenduranceSolutions@outlook.com. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and I hope you will join me again for the next one. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you liked what you heard in today's episode, please feel free to leave us a review. Those reviews are greatly appreciated and help spread the word about our podcast, as well as help us improve the content that we deliver to our listeners. And then finally, if you know of anyone who would be interested in listening to our podcast, please go ahead and share our podcast with them.